Good evening, and welcome to the Henry Schein Dental Academy webinar series. My name is Corinne, and I will be your moderator tonight. We are excited to welcome Eric Pook, President of Cirrus Consulting Group, and Kelly Moore, Lease Negotiator, as our speakers today. They will be providing tips, tricks, and proven strategies for lease negotiations. Before we get started, we do have a few reminders for you. At any point during the webinar, if you have questions, please type them into the Q&A section of your control panel. Henry Schein is not offering CE credit for viewing or attending this presentation live or on demand, and this webinar is sponsored by Cirrus. Kelly and Eric, welcome and thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much. Greatly appreciated. Thanks so much for having us. And what a heck of a year. What an unbelievable last 20 months it's been. I was just saying to Corinne, that's probably now our 32nd webinar, and truly very humbling as a great opportunity. I did want to make very quick mention to really one of the unsung heroes behind the scenes, a lady by the name of Gabby Garcia, who has been the key reason why there's new content seemingly each week. Incredible guest speakers, including the one we have for this evening, as well as incredible involvement, polling questions, results, interactivity, follow-up afterwards to ensure that we're getting prioritizing the help. She's really helped us streamline a lot of these processes and create a lot of best practices that now Henry Schein's using across all of the Dental Academy webinars. So a quick little appreciation for Gabby Garcia in the background as just before she flies out for holiday. So truly, thank you so much for joining us this evening, everyone. I see we've got lots just joining. If you are in the car, don't zoom and drive. We do have some great content here from our speaker this evening. I am the additional facilitator here. It was my pleasure. This was an idea we had probably now just pre-COVID, and Kelly has been incredibly busy working and helping successfully complete over 100 negotiations for dental clients from coast to coast to coast to coast. So you're in for an incredible treat this evening to really get a different perspective of the tenant-landlord relationship. I can almost guarantee we've got a few landlords logging in, and dental landlords at that, right? Trying to really see all sides. But I think from your perspective as the dentist, this will really help to frame the upcoming negotiation. And I think many of you just saw a slight little sliver as COVID ramped up. Suddenly you laid off 100% of your staff, yet the number one hit to overhead suddenly became your tenancy expense. And suddenly you picked up the phone and called the landlord and asked for help. And either, in some cases, I know many doctors that got the cold shoulder, or got the request for 3 years of audited financial statements or statements of the IRS for your tax returns. So really, we've got some incredible content tonight. I really encourage lots of interactivity. We'll keep things fun, fully interactive as we run through this evening. So just give us we'll happy to customize some content here. Give us a quick little update in the notes where you're coming from this evening. And we'll help to, again, reference some good recent examples as it pertains to some of those areas. And looking forward to sharing some great best practices tonight. So tonight is Secrets from the Other Side, what landlords won't tell you about post-pandemic lease negotiations. And Kelly Moore is our guest speaker. I'll be introducing her in just a second. She is, we're in for a fantastic understanding. When I first met Kelly, it was truly humbling to hear her stories, having negotiated against doctors, against similar size tenants, big, small, or otherwise, and really understanding that perception was such an eye-opening experience. So great to see Reno, Nevada. Looks like some Los Angeles. Thanks for joining us on the late afternoon. All right. Just to get things kicked off, again, to customize a little bit, we're going to pull up a poll now that we've got lots of you joined. So you should have a quick poll that pops up. Again, don't poll and drive. But there's been 3 or 4 key questions just to help get a good understanding for the room tonight. Number one, your current situation. Where do you sit right now? Are you thinking of opening, relocating the practice? Do you have that Rockefeller glass half full type of perspective now, right? Have you seen the rise and the falls? Did you feel you missed out on the last opportunity to expand, right? When you saw some key opportunities, and potentially now with Omicron ramping up, is that going to have a material impact on the future? Is that going to create finally some of those multi-generational locations, coffee shops or otherwise? Is that finally going to create an opportunity to get that beautiful satellite location that you've been eyeing for years? Thinking of acquiring, transition, selling, or do I just want to stay put, right? Dig in and negotiate a better term, because if you saw more than 5 for lease signs on the way to the office this morning, right, chances are it might be a good time to be dusting off that lease and thinking about when to re-engage the landlord, which we'll touch on tonight. The purpose, right? General knowledge, some specific guidance, or you know what, maybe there is something with my lease that I should have it reviewed. Curious about market rents and rates. And then also another good one to help frame some of the discussions. Are you in a month-to-month situation, which we're going to do some situational analysis on tonight? Is your lease due in the next 2 years, 2 to 5 years, over 5 years, or I own my own unit and building? And if you think that this might not be as applicable to you because you own your own, you are incorrect. Kelly has done probably the most in our organization this year of creating owner-occupied leases to separate your one pocket that owns the building from the other pocket that owns the practice. And then, of course, we've had well over 60 people request for help for a review and or rental rate analysis. Just to keep it easy, question 5 is a quick yes, and we'll be able to pull those reports for you. And myself and my team will be able to do a full analysis on the individual lease. Okay, on that note, on the next slide, just to give you a little bit of background on who we are and what we do. So Cirrus, we're pretty unique. We are the only healthcare specialized tenant representation firm of our kind in North America. This is it. This is all we do. And while many, including myself, didn't even think a business like ours existed, once you see a little bit of tonight, you wonder why every single doctor hasn't had someone at least helping to guide them or to open their eyes as to how impactful the lease can be on their dental practice. So very simply, we were founded by doctors for doctors to help ensure that they were protected and had someone to help navigate the dark side, right? Negotiating with the landlord, knowing that the dentist this is not their specialty. This is not what they do all day. We've now successfully done over 12,000 successful lease negotiations. And right, our team is pretty incredible. We have our in-house operations and real estate analytics and research team that helps to pull up all of these relevant data. In addition to that, we have multiple in-house commercial real estate attorneys that are negotiating dental leases all day, every day. We have some that have come from a business side. Some have been with us for over 19 years negotiating dental office leases. And then also, as I always like to say, some from the dark side, those that were previously negotiating against the tenant, against the dentist, to now bring on board to how now to make sure that we're helping in that David versus Goliath perspective, as I know that's how it can feel, especially after the past 2 years of just unbelievable exhaustion. So truly, if you haven't given yourselves, doctors, a pat on your back for accomplishing what you have over the past 2 years, you have gotten through it all. And now it's great to see that we're looking glass half full on the other side. And the purpose for this evening and the purpose, process, and payoff really for tonight is a fewfold. So the objectives tonight is to, how do we look at it, right? How do you look at it from the dental's perspective, right? And then asking Kelly, how do you look at it from your perspective? And, how would the landlord look at this? How do they look at financials? How do they look at business clauses in specific situations? And how do you help to protect yourselves? Some of you may think, well, hey, maybe we just let, sleeping dogs lie. Maybe my landlord doesn't know about any of this. Well, again, as you're learning about this, what do you think the landlords are doing when the landlords aren't placing implants, right? Drilling endo, right? And certainly aren't doing any pros this evening. All they're doing is negotiating leases all day, every day. So we'll talk about some strategies and really how to protect yourselves on how some of the ways that landlords increase their profitability, right? Without incurring a single extra dollar of expense purely at your expense of the tenant, just by managing and running out the clock. Okay, so our guest speaker this evening is a true privilege. Kelly is one of our esteemed lease negotiators. As mentioned, she worked for the other side. She worked for multiple large institutional types of landlords with multiple properties, dealing with tenants from the smallest to the largest, right, with incredible experience of really understanding what makes a landlord tick, how they look at the financials, how they look at getting deals done, when they look at getting deals done, and how to talk the talk, no different than a dentist speaking to a dentist. So, Kelly, again, has been incredible for our team, working with hundreds of doctors this year alone, again, doing over 100 successful lease negotiations with dental clients is truly remarkable. Let it be with assignments, let it be renewals, let it be new starts, right? Or even just simply advisory services. So again, on that note, her experience unparalleled, will be a fantastic asset to you as a dental tenant for more information about the other side. So Kelly, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Been years we've been talking about this. So yeah. We envisioned, right, a great big room, right, downtown, Bank of America Tower. We'll still get back there at One Bryant Park. But in the meantime, thanks for again joining us coast to coast. So financials, Kelly. So let's talk about financials first. So these are some of the top ones in these types of webinars that we look through. And, doctors will typically look at base rent and really just on the first half of the first page. Who am I paying? Who's paying it? How much am I paying? Right? And that's about it. So let's broaden all the horizons. Annual increases, of course, as we dig through, seems important for the doctor, especially now with inflation and the feds and everything else starting to shake things up a little bit. That can be a massive opportunity for the landlord to increase their total revenue. Taxes, maintenance, and insurance is another big one that, again, looking at it as some doctors are completely unaware that up to a third, even in some cases a half of their base rent can be going towards triple nets and additional rents, as we'll touch on. Also, Kelly, very interested to know how you would look at fixturing from a landlord side as the doctor's building out and or free rent. And then the big one we always get a ton of questions on is the fool's gold, is the tenant improvement allowance. And well, hey, the landlord offered me $80 per square foot. That's fantastic, isn't it? Right. And then last but not least, landlord work. How do I make sure that I help to minimize the whoops when I'm building out my dental specific practice? On that note, just as a Q&A, as I pass it to Kelly, use the Q&A throughout, guys. We're happy to answer some questions as we go, and we're going to have some frequently asked questions that we've got from a number of you prior to the webinar, and then also have a full section for Q&A and keep it open as long as we need to have as much case-specific examples here this evening. Okay, on that note, Kelly, over to you.
Thank you, Eric. So the first thing I want to talk about when we're looking at those 7 main important criteria of what the landlord looks at is knowing who is your landlord. Is your landlord a big landlord, like a real estate investment trust? Do they have multiple properties? Do they have deep pockets? Has your property sold multiple times? Are they a flipper or investor? Or is it family owned? I worked for 2 REITs, so multi-billion-dollar companies, and I can tell you that they have analysts analyzing the rent roll constantly, telling the leasing managers what budgets they need to hit, and dictating essentially the rental rates that need to be achieved for that year. The leasing managers and directors also get a commission, get a bonus at the end of the year for the work they've achieved in raising rates. So at the end of the day, everything has a price, right? So it's important that you have a fair lease to protect you as a tenant from whatever could happen. In a situation like a family-owned building, maybe you're thinking, oh, Ted, my landlord, he's a great guy. We go way back. He understands me, and he's been really good to me. But funny things happen when a check is waved in their face and you have a month left on your lease. Well, then they might go silent on you and wait for the buyer, who might be a flipper or investor, to renew you. And at that point, you're kind of stuck, because here you thought having a great relationship with him, it would be no problem. So there's always things to consider, and it's very important that a lease protects you. So let's look at how a landlord would view deals. First and foremost is the base rent, right? From a landlord's perspective, the base rent is not just the money collected every month. It's the rental rate. It's the dollar per square foot that has a huge impact on the value of the landlord's building when determining its worth. Try and say that 5 times. So what we're going to do next in these next couple of slides is look at how the base rent, mixed with some of those incentives Eric was talking about, affects the overall deal from the landlord's perspective. So if you're looking to do a new deal with a landlord and open up your first clinic or even relocate, of course there's the rent, but then you may have heard of some of these inducements that landlords are offering to new tenants. And of course, sometimes when you're up for renewal, you might be able to squeeze some free rent, tenant improvement allowance, or get the landlord to fix a few things for you. But we have to always remember that there's no such thing as a free lunch. So you have to be careful, because when you ask for certain things, the landlord's going to expect to get something back in return. So let's look at deal number one. Deal number one, you have a 2,000 square foot unit. The rent the landlord quoted you was $30 for the first 5 years, and then $35 for the last 5 years. You get 6 months of free rent to build out. There's some landlord's work, like maybe demolishing existing leasehold improvements, and the money to build out, the tenant improvement allowance. Maybe you've heard of this as another form of inducement, is $60 a square foot, and on 2,000 square feet, that's $120,000. Well, awesome. That sounds like a great deal, right? Don't you think? But when you look really closely at deal number two, and you ask the landlord, what if I actually take less? What if we cut that inducement in half and only get $30? Well, look what it did to the rental rate. Now I'm actually only paying $25 a square foot for the first 5 years and $30 for the next 5. So it's really important to understand that landlords are not a bank. So sometimes it's important to go back and think about it. What is it that you really want? Do you really need that $125,000 from the landlord? Or would you rather a lesser rental rate, which is probably the better way to go? Because considering you're going to be there for 30 years, and of course, the landlord's going to want to see increments every 10 years when you start to renew, it might be better to start with a lower rental rate.
Try to look at this again as a check. Take your monthly payment, multiply by the annual increases, and then the total time that you plan to be there. And most of you on the back of a napkin could be in the 1 million, 1.5, $2+ million. So don't underestimate how critical the smallest little pennies now can represent over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And money is cheap. So if there's an opportunity to get a little more from your lending partner, gives a great opportunity now to be smart and to try to fight tooth and nail for every penny on the front end, which you'd be shocked to see the difference. We ran some numbers the other day. It was almost 200,000 difference to take a much higher tenant inducement upfront from the landlord, but it was baked in. And then even worse, at the end of the term, at the option, it was going to be the then greater value if you just exercised your option. So basically, you're on that world's most boring roller coaster with just going up and up and up. So be conscious of that, and really don't just look at that first half of the first page. Really think of your long-term value, because certainly that's how your landlord is.
Yeah, Eric, that's a really good point, because I would say, coming from the landlord side, if deal number one, tenant number one was coming up for renewal and they were paying 35, and the market was doing just fine, there's no way I'm taking less than what you're currently paying at least. And of course, I'm asking for an increase. And a tenant could come back and say, oh, but that's because, you gave me $120,000 before. Well, it doesn't matter. Landlords are very tough to negotiate downwards with.
Right. And for those of you buying, of the 33% of you that were looking to buy a practice in the near future, if you're wondering why the heck is that doctor's practice paying so much more above market rent? Right? Well, I bet if you dug in a little deeper, you'd find out that they took $125,000 worth of tenant improvement allowance originally, which obviously got baked in, which is why the landlord's saying, well, yeah, it's higher because I got to recoup my investment.
And yeah, it's not to say, and the other thing which is important to realize, is going back to that base rental number, that per square foot number, landlords would have a bottom line. So it's not like, let's just forego the $30. Can you make that $20, $15 now? It's a very tough balancing act. So sometimes it is worth it to take some of that money. But that's what we do, is we try to peel back that onion to see, how much we can get in which bucket.
Correct.
So this is a very simplistic, basic math. It doesn't take into account the amortization of a say a 10-year term. But just think about it. If rent is $5, but the landlord gives you $4, the landlord is left with $1. So that's why the landlord looks at giving out money a certain way. So kind of in very simplistic terms again, therefore, in order to give you $4, rent would need to be $9. Other incentives as well are fixturing periods, which is the time it takes you to build out your practice free of rent. So the goal of the landlord is to lease their space as quick as possible, because vacancies cause problems for landlords, as we know, as they are the ones that need to pay for the taxes and maintenance for the unit. Therefore, the time a landlord will give you to build out your space affects their cash flow. So sometimes landlords can be short-sighted and take the quickest deal rather than waiting a bit longer for a more stable tenant, like a dentist. So we always strive for a minimum of 6 months. Sometimes we get a point of contention that that's too long. On the landlord side, again, this does affect the rental rate and the overall deal. The other freebies, right? It's not free, that they're giving you. So it's very important to know how much time you actually need, and you're asking for the right amount. Because it's also important to remember, no landlords are going to wait forever. Additional rent. Additional rent's a funny one, because additional rent is actually not supposed to be a profit center for the landlord. This is the money that you probably all know if you're renting, the extra money paid on top of your base rent, which includes your share of the property's taxes, maintenance, and a lot of people don't know you actually are paying a portion of the landlord's insurance. But this can still pose a problem for you, right? Because it does affect your overall gross rent. So it's very important to know what's included in your rent. How are big capital expenses being charged? Go and look in your lease and see if there's something called amortization. If the roof needs to be repaired, their parking lot needs to be repaired, those are big ticket items. You don't want to be dinged when that needs to be repaired all in one chunk. So what can we do? What can you do to minimize the risk when it comes to additional rent? You can ask for a breakdown of expenses in detail, ask to see your year-over-year statements, ask for a cap on controllable costs, and ask for an audit right. I will say, working on the landlord side, the landlord doesn't love seeing caps on their additional rent because, again, they're not supposed to be making money off of it. But every year, we would get together in a boardroom and analyze what we are charging for additional rent, because we would have negotiators come tell us that our additional rent is too high, and that's why they went somewhere else. So it's a tough balance for a landlord as well. I think the most important thing that you can do is to make sure you have visualization and get that at least at a minimum, a breakdown of what you're paying for.
So that's important. It is one that, landlords can say, hey, it is what it is, have a nice day. But these are four, right, key buckets and another one is even just looking at certain exclusions, right? What is reasonable, what might not be reasonable, or if you're wondering, why the heck is it so high? Especially when half of the building is vacant. Well, hang on a second. Am I actually paying for the brokerage fees for that, or legal fees for units that aren't even mine? Right. So knowing is half the battle, and being proactive and knowing that it's one of those things on the list that can be done both as a new deal and or potentially as a renewal. Right. It's a major percentage of the total check that you're sending to the landlord each and every year.
Mm-hmm. And it definitely does matter, because it's money, right? Where it's going, we don't care. I'm speaking as Cirrus as a tenant, we don't care, because it's still money at the door. Annual increases, you'll likely always you'll see an annual increase in a 5 or 10 year lease. I will say today and forever, the industry standard has been 3%. We at Cirrus try to negotiate, that as low as we can, in the 2 to 3% range. Have you ever tried asking your landlord for 2.5 or 2.75? So there are other things, it's a range that you can ask for. See or check in your lease if if the landlord insists on CPI. If they do, you should definitely be requesting a cap. I have been having some conversations with landlords now due to the scare of inflation, that they're wanting to see 4 or 5% annual increases. But what you guys can't do is go ask, your insurer to pay more, right? So it's a fine line.
The other thing too, just to add, is that we've also had some successes just ironing some of these out. Some landlords that are very anxious to have a dental specific tenant rather. You'd be surprised, right? If you're concerned about your first year or second year and switching over from being an associate, we have seen some good successes explaining to the landlord why we have to iron out some of those, meaning how do we help to fix the first 3 years? Maybe there's an adjustment right at year 4, 5, 6, 7, right? Another adjustment. So there's a lot of creativity, as many ways as you could think. But yes, this is a bit of a good framework, but just be cautious, because this is going to become a bigger and bigger bone of contention at your next renewal.
So what are the takeaways from briefly, and this is, we're really just scratching the surface here, is that not all landlords are the same, right? Going back to who is your landlord, and there's definitely no one way to negotiate, because some landlords have deep pockets, like the REITs I used to work for. So yeah, they can throw a little bit more money at a deal. Others might be family-owned buildings where you actually might have to, in order to secure the spot, if they have a great location, pay for a tiny bit of additional rent, because we're dealing with somebody that doesn't have billions of dollars. So that's why it's important to understand who is your landlord and what do they value? How are they looking at analyzing your overall lease and deal?
And you've got multiple variables there, right? Again, base rent goes without saying. Get all the data, as we'll touch on, to know what, in fact, fair market rents are in comparables. Annual increases we touched on, right? Common area maintenance we touched on. Fixturing and free rent, right? We touched on it at a high level. Fixturing is the time building up to, right, from getting the keys to when the meter starts running, right? And then the time after. Don't underestimate how valuable you are to the tenant, to the landlord, right? I did mention it previously, but you've got some of the lowest default rate of any other group, 0.5%. In addition to that, you've got the highest build-out costs, right? Sometimes, some of you now, especially on the West Coast, for a few of you in California, the Bay Area now is over $400 per square foot to build out a dental practice. That is bonkers. So again, that the second you affix that whatever to the wall, etc., that becomes property of the landlord. So all the beautiful fixtures, right, the bathrooms, etc., all of that becomes instantly value of the property. So be conscious of that. Realize your value, and of course, right, you are now COVID proof from the perspective of the fact that you can never work from home. So the landlords realize that across, if Omicron, heaven forbid, causes another lockdown, right, you are the one that's shown that can never work from home and still has to provide, right, healthcare, oral care, right, at your individual facilities.
We're going to touch upon some of those clauses, provisions in the lease, like restoration. So I'll tell you what the landlord's concern is, to help you better understand their perspective.
So that's the financials, Kelly. Now, right, is the business clauses. And these are, quite frankly, where the vast majority of the negotiation, in my opinion, should take place. Because if you're following along and you'd want to do a screenshot, this is the one to do. This is, if you're not clear on even one of these, it could have tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars of impact to your business. So be conscious of that. And also realize that these are typically the ones we look at from a negotiation perspective. How do we help to add dental specific language? You're going to hear that a lot, right? Why is your lease exactly the same as the florist next door when you're about to sell your practice for $2.2 million, right? So these are some key ones that you really want to be aware of, right? Can you make changes to the space? Right? Did you make changes to your space because of COVID? Right? Did you cordon some operatories off? Did you impact the airflow? Right? Did you, I put in some temporary stuff, but did you bring in a contractor? Right? Did you have any plans? Did you get that?
Tell the landlord. Right?
Yeah. Did you get it? Did you get it in writing? Did you even tell the landlord? Right? Many of you could be in a default situation and not even be aware of it, especially if there's a no notification on the cure period, etc. So that's a huge one, right? Continuous operation. We saw a doctor in a strip mall, an enclosed strip mall, as the pandemic ramped up. The whole mall was closed. They got a default notice. We know, right, per state guidelines. However, you're closed. It says you have to be open from 9 to 5. Here's your default notice, right? Demolition, relocation, we'll touch on. Death and disability is a major one. Overholding, etc. So without ado, Kelly, back to you.
So I think one of the biggest ones, some of the biggest questions are around personal guarantees and continuing liability. So what is a personal guarantee? Why does a landlord request it? So what I always tell people, and coming from the landlord side, is they don't know you, right? They don't know who you are, and you're just one person. Even if you have a partner, it's still you too, right? You're not on the stock market. You don't have a board, right? So if you have an inkling of anything terrible happening with your business, you can do essentially a midnight run, sell off your equipment, close shop, hold the corporation, and now the landlord, is kind of SOL, right? Who do they go after? Who do they turn to? So personal guarantees are usually requested at the beginning of a lease. Like I said, they don't know you, and especially if you're an associate, sort of right out of school, what kind of assets do you have? So they're going to look to you to promise a personal guarantee, essentially a promise that you're going to pay the rent. I think that's something we need to recognize as normal, and especially just in the beginning. So what we can do from the tenant's perspective to the landlord is say, that's fine, right? We recognize that that's a concern of yours, but can it fall off? Can the personal guarantee go away after 5 years? Can we cap the amount that the tenant is liable under the lease if anything bad were to happen? I'd ask for something super low on a 10-year deal at, I don't know, 50 grand. What's 50 grand when you owe the landlord $1 million, right? You can also offer more of a security deposit if that's something you're just super sensitive about, and maybe you do have extra cash on hand. And with that, you can ask for the security deposit to get applied in, maybe year 2 or 3 and have that fall off. There's a bunch of things you can do when a landlord requests a personal guarantee, but the bottom line is they don't know you.
The only thing I'd add there is that it's one of the biggest hot buttons when talking to doctors. And the biggest takeaway, hopefully for you all tonight, is regardless of the situation, Dr. S, I saw your question, we're going to come to that about automatic renewal clauses. And a reminder for anybody to throw in any Q&A as we go, it doesn't have to be there forever and ever, amen. Mm-hmm. And as we'll see, some of you may be shocked to know how long it can be. And it does expose yourself. And especially if you're incorporated, it should be towards the top of your list in the next renegotiation, especially if you've been a stellar tenant, and especially through COVID, if you, like so many of your colleagues, have just continued to pay your rent, even though you're going through some significant personal hardship.
Mm-hmm. And then the next thing where it kind of flows into continuing liability is what happens after you sell? If the landlord has said, no, I want you on the lease forever, as long as you're there, well, what does it say about when you sell? This is another kind of hot topic as well. Because most leases require the selling doctor to stay on the lease term. Why, might you ask? Well, they did the lease with you. They didn't do the lease with the new person. And again, it comes back to they don't know the new person. So they say, I don't know that person. I'm fine that you want to sell your business, but you're going to be now the personal guarantee for someone else. And I would say that's probably more the riskier and scarier thing to get behind. So this is a clause that we focus on a lot at Cirrus, is trying to get an immediate release after you sell. And if not, we have some other language to suggest.
Just quick one, just probably the vast, I would say 90% of the people on this call right now, if you went through your lease, if you're following along, will have this continuing liability clause. That means even after you've sold, just to reiterate that point, right? And the new doctor defaults, you are not only responsible for, just like we had a doctor reach out to us from Michigan, not only the past months of, right, whatever they have not made good on, but also the remaining 6.5 years left on the lease. So be conscious of that. It's as if you're co-signing a lease for your neighbor's kid and then moving out of state, right? Because you have nothing to do left with the practice. So be conscious of that and really look through the assignment section to see if, even if you do sell and assign the lease, right, does that make any change, or are you still on the hook as much as you are today?
Another thing you'll probably find in your lease is what we call consideration language that says, if you do assign your lease and there's any consideration given to the assignment of the lease, that the landlord has the right to retain any proceeds. So when we're looking at this through a dental lens, well, wait a minute, is that your sale proceeds? So I have heard of some landlords. Personally, I've been in a deal where the landlord said, yeah, those are my four walls. You wouldn't have been able to make that profit without my product. Yeah, you paid me rent, but it's still mine, so I'm entitled to some of it.
I had another one, a doctor, personal client of mine, and it was doctor sold to a large corporation, was selling 2 of their locations. This was one in a mall that was going to be redeveloped, and the landlord said no. Right? And the buy and the sale was conditional on the successful assignment of the lease. So the landlord's view of this is, well, hang on a second, right? If $2 million is being held up because of my signature, I want something. In this particular case, the doctor had to pay on sale as an adjustment on close $160,000 to the landlord purely for a single signature to assign a lease, right, from themselves to the buyer. Mm-hmm. Right? Ask yourself, how much is your practice worth without the keys, without the lease? Depreciated equipment, right? And the goodwill of your charts, a fraction of what it would be unless it had the right continuity and predictability of revenue.
Another thing in the assignment clause you might see is the termination upon a request for an assignment. And I know that was in some of the leases that we had at my old firm when I was on the landlord side. The reason for that, and we even were in a situation where we might have terminated a tenant because the tenant below them wanted to expand and take a second floor. So tenant comes and says, can I sign my lease? The language says, nope, I'm going to terminate you. At a minimum, what you should be doing is ask for a request to revoke that ask. But what we like to try to do is delete that language completely because it's obviously very unreasonable. Another thing you might see is adjusting the base rental rate. Well, that kind of messes with your sale as well, right? Because the buyer wants to know what they're paying. And if you go ask for the right to assign your lease and sell your practice, and the landlord says, oh, well, I gave you that deal, 8 years ago, and that was the rental rate then, but the rental rate now is X, so your buyer is going to pay this. Another clause that we like on the tenant side, and I'll explain why the landlord doesn't love it, is the death and disability provision, which helps protect you and your family in the case of an unfortunate or unseen accident or illness. What a lot of people don't know is that when you sign a lease, there is a line. If say your lease is 60 pages, it's just one line, probably at the very end, that says the lease binds your heirs and successors. Well, that's your family, right? That's the people next to mine. So if something were to happen to you, they would assume your rental payments. What we like to try and add is a clause that says, now I'm dumbing it down, but if you can't sell your practice because of a disability or an unfortunate event where you passed away, you would have the right to terminate the lease, basically get you out of the lease. How does the landlord view that clause? Well, it's a termination right. And they're not trying to be mean or evil-spirited, but they have lenders and they have mortgagers they have to answer to. So if there's any right to terminate, that can alert some of these people that they have to answer to.
We'll keep flowing through these, but think the last one is just like a life insurance policy that doesn't cost you a penny.
Yeah.
Dental specific language that protects you from completely the unknown.
Yeah, we're trying to circumnavigate your insurance premiums by adding it to the lease, because another thing landlords will say, well, go get insurance, right? Go have your premium pay my rent. The restoration requirements, what Eric touched upon briefly, was, and again, some tenants don't know this, is as soon as you build out your dental practice, everything except your personal property and your trade fixtures becomes the property of the landlord. To go even further than that, most leases actually include a provision that require the tenant to remove their leasehold improvements. So the floors, the ceiling tiles, the bathroom, the kitchen cabinetry, the operatory walls at the tenant's cost, if the landlord requires the removal at the end of the lease term. You're probably thinking, well, I want to sell. Yeah, well, this clause, might not see the light of day, but what if it does? Right? Why not add something if you do actually need to relocate because you're expanding and you're growing? You don't want this to be a $50,000 hiccup right at the very end that you could have been protected by saying no restoration required. So options to extend. Options to extend are the tenant's legal right to stay in the building. What's important to note, there's usually time frames put around when a tenant can tell the landlord they wish to extend their tenancy. If the tenant misses the date, then the option and all further options become null and void. And some option language allows the landlord to put the tenant on a new lease, which could include detrimental clauses like a demolition clause. What is the rental rate? How is it determined? Do you have a mechanism in your lease if the landlord's being unreasonable, like arbitration, or a third party coming in saying, you're right, you're wrong? So the landlords, I've seen these done, any which way. And of course, on the landlord side, you want your option language to be as beneficial to the landlord, because when the landlord gives you options, they're giving those to you in the future, and they don't know what the future holds, and maybe they don't want you to stay. So next, we're going to talk about situations, and I'm going to actually touch upon the option language a bit more in some of these situations. So if any of you are a month-to-month tenant, here's a situational overview. Dr. Bob let his lease lapse because he was not sure what his plans are for the future. You might think that this is a good idea because, that would give you ultimate flexibility. Who knows, why or what you're thinking of. You're not sure if you want to sign 3, a 5, a 10-year lease. You're just thinking about it. You're waiting. Maybe you don't know if, your associate wants to buy. You don't know what they want in terms of a term. But my advice is never let your lease lapse. Always give yourself enough time to extend your lease, which is typically 2 years before the expiry. Things to consider when a landlord sees you as a month-to-month is that they can actually charge you overholding rent. Almost all leases include an overholding provision, which says you owe me double. You don't have a lease with me anymore, so I have the right to charge you more. A landlord can also put you on a new lease agreement, and they can also give you notice to leave. They don't want you there. Also, rent is negotiable with the landlord being in the best position, because if you actually do want to stay, the landlord's not, they're not dumb, and they know how much it costs for you to build out your space and how costly it is to move. So don't ever let yourself be in a month-to-month position.
If you are, and I think we had about 22% of you on the poll, be conscious, and then there'll be a poll in about 10 minutes. But please mark urgent because, again, that's the continuity and predictability of revenue for your business. So if you are in a month-to-month situation, you might, again, have a fleeting thought that, hey, maybe this is good for me. But when you dig through, as Kelly mentioned, it could be the worst thing for your practice, right? If you get a brown envelope taped to your door as you drive to the practice tomorrow and you open it up, right, what would you do? If it said, right, hereby, right, we're exercising our 30-day right to terminate the lease, what would you do? Right? Who would you call? And wondering how could you have prevented this? Which brings us to situation number 2.
Yeah, and just to go back to that, I would say as working for a landlord, maybe we've tried to contact this tenant and, you guys get so, obviously life is busy and you get busy and you forget to return that email, and a month went by and I get a call from a dentist asking if there's space for lease. I would say, yeah, actually, I have a built out practice. I don't know what this guy is doing. Let's do a deal. I don't hear from you. Do a deal. Give you 30 days notice to leave.
And they've just got a beautiful, fully built out dental practice at your expense. And suddenly maybe they got an extra 20% because it was a fully built out dental practice.
Mm-hmm. So touching back on the options to renew. So Dr. Sarah had one more option to renew or lease for additional 5 more years, but did not send in written notice in the time frame specified under the lease. Go and check these. If you do have options, when do you need to give notice? There's usually a time frame, and how. How is very important. I don't recommend just shooting an email to your property manager. There's actually a very detailed section that you need to courier a letter to the person in your notice section or to that address, or actually hand deliver like you're serving somebody. And until that happens, it's not a legally binding option. Does the landlord have the ability to change the terms of your lease in the option language? We kind of talked about that. Do you have preset rents or are they negotiables? And are your options transferable? Look to see if there's a line at the end or even at the top that says this is personal to you. Or if the lease gets assigned, they become null and void. Well, that doesn't help your buyer. So one thing to consider from the landlord's point of view is that the options to renew are a benefit to the tenant, not the landlord. You might think, well, yeah, I want to stay. Shouldn't they know that I with the option I'm going to stay? Well, not really, right? Again, I was saying the landlord could have other plans for your unit or the future of the building, but as soon as you send in that letter, they have to accept you when really they, had a huge overhaul of the building and they wanted Starbucks in there. And very important, the landlord's never going to remind you to exercise your right. They prefer you miss it because that actually puts them in a better position, because going back to knowing how much you spent on your build out and how much it costs for you to move, they're in the position of power. Situation number 3, 24 months out. Dr. Susan lease is expiring in 2 years. Is now time to approach the landlord? Yes. 2 years prior to the expiry is a perfect time to engage your landlord. It shows that you are aware of the expiry and any potential renewal options. It also gives you enough time to make an informed decision based on the landlord's response. Do you renew, or does it make sense for you to relocate? Things to consider again from the landlord's point of view is the landlord would like to negotiate closest to the expiry date because it's difficult. Sometimes they'll say it's difficult to predict the real estate market 2 years out. And again, going back to knowing the type of investment you made. So drawing you out to that very last second and then telling you rent's $20 more. Well, now you don't have time to move, right? That would have been very helpful to know 2 years prior, so you can, again, make the most informed decision.
Just to add to that, and I saw, Dr. Blogan, I saw your hand raised there. Feel free to throw anything into Q&A. But this is how landlords attend webinars just like this to learn how to better negotiate and how to increase their profit without increasing a penny of expense. How is purely to run out the clock. So if you think, boy, my landlord, geez, they didn't remind me, or they only seem to come to me 2 months prior to expiry or 1 month prior to expiry, right? Or even the day after the option to renew deadline has passed. Please, doctors, get out your phones now, put in when does your lease expire, and more importantly, if you have any remaining options, what is that option to renew deadline? I can promise you it'll come up faster than you can imagine. But this, exactly what you're looking at here, is the fact that ideally you want to start 24 months out. It could be 18 months to pick up and relocate a practice. But by waiting suddenly 12 months or 8 months, and then suddenly you've missed your option to renew deadline, right? Well, now what does it mean? It means you're getting more and more nervous, right? And the landlord is holding more and more of the cards. So think about that, right? If you're now month to month, if you're now, lease is coming up for renewal in 2 months or 3 months, right? The landlord could come back and say, congratulations, here's a 20% bump. What else are you going to do? Right. So that's why the more time there's leverage. It's never too late to engage the landlord. Right. And certainly dangling a 5 or a 10-year term brings things back to reality. But you're right. You really do expose yourselves and put yourselves into a negative situation because you lose. Right. You think, oh, yeah, I got another 10 years, Kelly, no problems. Well, no, you had a 12-month option to renew deadline, which you forgot about. And therefore, the remaining 10 years has become null and void. You have no legal right to stay in your space after 2022.
Yes. And so even if you do have options to renew, the 2-year mark is great to start that conversation, because the idea is you want to keep those. You don't want to use them. You don't want to use them up. So I approach the landlord and say, I want to do a 10-year deal plus keeping my 2 5-year options, because that will give you the maximum term that will help you, of course, in a sales situation as well.
That's right.
I will say, in real life experience, I was looking through my binder. I reached out to a tenant to see if they wanted to renew, and my director slapped my hand and said, Kelly, you reached out to them too early. Now they know, now they have time to look somewhere else. It was a small law firm, but I'm telling you, they are serious about their timing. Situation number 4, transitioning doctor with 5 to 10 years. So Dr. Allen's lease is coming up for expiry and plans to sell within 5 to 10 years. What's really important is setting goals, right? Realizing what's the most important thing you need to sell. It's definitely term, talking about keeping those options to renew if you have them. And if you don't, getting them. Fair rental rates, of course, and a tenant-friendly assignment clause at a bare minimum. Things to consider from the landlord's point of view. I mean, don't let the landlord be aware of your transition plans when you're renegotiating your lease. You might, again, think they're your friend, or think nothing of it. But if they know you're selling, again, it goes back to you being you and it being your lease, right? So if they get an idea that you actually are setting this up for a sale to leave, well, then they might say, no, I'm just going to, extend you in a short period of time. And, Dr. Joe can come talk to me when they, directly when you want to sell, and we can do a new lease with him. Well, that really messes up your sale process.
Let alone personal guarantees, let alone. So yes, the more runway you have, the better. From a leverage perspective, far easier to do it 5 to 10 years out than it is when you've got the Henry Schein practice transition team saying, your lease is a problem.
Mm-hmm. And you don't have term to sell, because the buyer needs to see term to go to the bank to get the loan to give you the money.
Correct. Right. Which is exactly, Dr. S, to your point, which we'll jump in. We're going to skip over the one section so we can jump into Q&A here in a moment. But that's, Dr. S, that's exactly your question here, is if a landlord refuses to assign a lease to a practice buyer, how does the buyer get a bank note if it's contingent on having a lease? Right. So,
yeah, and that's where you want to look at your assignment clause with a magnifying glass.
And exactly that. I mean, the banks, Bank of America is one typically we do get involved with, because if there's insufficient term on the lease, right? If there's 3 years left on the lease, yet suddenly they want $1 million note to buy your practice, that's not going through. So it's really the continuity and predictability of revenue is what you should be looking at it, and start looking at your next renewal through the buyer's eyes, because that lease from 1986 most likely is going to be the governing document for them, right? Moving forward as you assign it from yourselves to them.
Mm-hmm. Let's do
We're going to skip over this, but if you just
can I do this?
Oh, yeah, please. Yeah.
And then we'll skip over the rest of it. But this is a visual that I would create on the landlord side to give a good idea of where my tenants are, what their expiries are, if they had options, right? And if there are any rights that I have to relocate him. So if you focus in on the ground floor dental practice here with 2,500 square feet, yes, they still have a bit of term left if we're looking at, their term today, but they have no options to extend or renew. And their right to relocate, I have no conditions where I have to pay for their build out or anything like that. The coffee shop beside them is expiring in 2 months, and the dry cleaner is already expired. And I just got a phone call that, I don't know, Tom Hanks and Rita Wilson want to open up their first restaurant in LA, and it's going to be fine dining, and it's going to be the best thing ever. And I love that concept. So what am I going to do? I'm going to say, all I have to do is move this dental practice. And where can I put them? Oh, look, I have space in the lower level of my building in the basement. Or I can put them on the third floor, where now their patients are going to have to use the elevator that sometimes breaks. So be very careful of your relocation rights and what's in there, and how can the landlord relocate you if there's anything that you need to pay, that they need to pay or build out for you. So it's very important. It costs money at the end of the day.
And even looking at the colors, right? As I spent time with my 1 and 4-year-old today, right? It's the colors. These are the ones that typically are driving the most revenue, and the landlords might going to cater to them first. So you're right. Maybe the fertility clinic wants to go ground floor. Maybe the insurance firm wants to go ground floor, right? They're the ones to say, I'm going to guarantee 5,000 square feet. Right? What are you going to do for me? So, right, this is little Lego blocks moving around. And while, yes, we believe, and you are incredibly important and an incredibly valuable tenant, however, right, the more that you leave yourselves exposed could make a major financial headache for you. So we have some good examples here. Again, in the essence of time, we will pull up a poll here in just a moment to request a complimentary lease review. If you've got any questions about your lease and some of these red flags, just if you click ahead, if you, Kelly, there's just one particular clause here, and it has dozens of red flags. So be conscious, be aware, and there is, if nothing else, become aware. Use this as a bit of a nudge in the right direction, to be aware of what's in your lease, to be aware of what you can see and above. So just as a poll before we get to Q&A here, just to be respectful of time, is again, an appreciation of everyone's time. We will be doing a complimentary lease review and rental rate analysis. So we waive the $2,000 fee in appreciation for your time this evening, where we'll go through and help to analyze specifically, what are these red flags, right? Where do your financials compare to market rates? And specifically, how can you protect yourselves? So, part of what our team does is help to create a negotiation treatment plan, figuring out what that looks like, right? How, knowing that things aren't going to get better, right? That it is as much as you can prepare for. And how do we help to look at what are your must-haves, what are your nice-to-haves, and what are things that you're willing to certainly to concede. So Kelly, if you advance ahead a little bit, again, and through that poll, again, we truly appreciate everyone's time. I see a lot of Q&A starting to come in. Feel free to throw in some additional Q&A. Great feedback. Great recent examples, Kelly. If you keep moving forward, this really is one of the biggest pieces. Just one caution, right? First things first is get all the information. Make sure you have the complete documentation. If not, email your landlord right now and say, hey, I'm just preparing my year-end files, right, for PPP or everything else. You're supposed to have a copy of, right, that executed copy of the lease. If you don't have something that's countersigned by the landlord, it's not worth the paper it's written on. So number one, get all the information. Quick email, you'll get it back in 36 seconds. Maybe not 36 seconds, right, especially for those on the East Coast, but you get my point. Number two, figure out the goals, right? What's that carefully choreographed game of chess to get you from point A to point B? Number three, get it reviewed, right? At least understand what's inside the lease. Number four is get the data. What's rental rates? What vacancies? Kelly, what the heck is market price for me in Bethesda? Where we just had a client last week retain us for the third time, funny enough. And then number five is, what does the end goal look like, right? Kelly, here's what ultimately I want to accomplish. Here's what I want to sell. What do we need to do first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth before we actually get to our end game? And how do we make sure that we're not showing all our cards right away? Because I can assure you, unfortunately, one of you at the end of this is going to say, I'm going to skip number 1 through 5. And I watched Kelly, and Kelly said to start early, and I'm going to reach out to my landlord and say, great, Mr. Landlord, how much do you want to charge me? Right. And what's the landlord going to do? They're going to say, oh, you're 2 years out. Oh, no, you're way too soon. Oh, no. Come on. It's the pandemic. It's this, it's that, it's this. So, right. All kidding aside, a little tongue in cheek, guys, right? Then negotiate financials, then business clauses, right? Don't stop until there's a final form lease that you're incredibly pleased with. Kelly, anything to add to that?
Yeah, and are we going to go through some of our questions?
Yes, correct.
Okay. Do you want to?
Yep. So as mentioned, again, this is the what I mentioned just a moment ago for the critical dates and risk analysis for the poll. If you haven't filled that out already, due mark it is urgent. If it is month to month, you've missed your option to renew deadline, we will prioritize those. We have staffed the team to help support all doctors throughout the holidays, knowing that many of you are also running up against end of year insurance, so lots of patience. But for those of you that are concerned, certainly keep the emails open as well. You can see info@cirrusconsultinggroup.com or click that yes as we go through. Okay. So on that note, let's jump into one of the additional questions here, and then we'll get into some top frequently asked questions, which we had a bunch reach out to us. So again, Dr. S, I've got an automatic renewal clause in my lease, but I would like to negotiate some incentives. I'm assuming this would go into the category of a lease amendment. How much would you charge, et cetera, but maybe from a strategy perspective, Kelly. So a doctor that, it's funny, in many cases, Dr. S, I'd say a lot of doctors think it's automatic and are surprised that it's not. Mm-hmm. But Kelly, do you want to jump on that one?
Yeah, no, to your point, sometimes it's very rare I would see an automatic renewal. But even if it is, I think there's no harm. Our motto is give us enough time to try, right? Let's leverage. We're still leveraging the pandemic. We're still seeing with this new variant, certain closures and people getting scared and not coming to the dentist. Let us leverage some of that to see what we can get. And of course, if you're a good tenant, landlords like to know that they don't mind, again, giving some incentives to people that pay rent on time.
Yeah, just really to put yourselves in the landlord's shoes, even if it's an automatic renewal. Well, we just talked about that, right? Kelly was saying before, don't exercise that option depending on your situation. It might be far better off to kids' terms, right? Pirates of the Caribbean, right? If you're just exercising that option, you're just walking further down the gangplank. You exercise the last one, suddenly now you want to sell, and 10 years from now, you got nothing left. So as Kelly suggested, far better to negotiate a new 5-year term or a new 10-year term and keep those 2 5-year options at the end, right? Think of those as almost insurance for, right? The other question we had about, how do they help to get a banknote? Well, they get a banknote because you've got 2 transferable 5-year options at the end of your term, right? So it's a complete counter way of looking at it, but it can help to save your practice, save your practice sale. Okay, so I see almost all are still on. We appreciate everyone's extra time. We're happy to cover through as many Q&As as you'd like to throw at us. These are a bunch that we received in advance and typically are some of the top questions we get today. So, Kelly, what's number 1? So, 20 months, COVID, pandemic language. What's changed? What's new? I mean, we've covered this throughout the seminar today about, how are we asking? What are we asking? How do we frame things? But Kelly, from your expert opinion, what changes have you seen now over the past 20 months from a new deal, renewal, et cetera perspective?
Yeah, I would say when COVID hit, landlords were a little nervous for sure. Over the past year, they're kind of getting their groove back, thinking, especially because now everybody wants to go out, they've been inside all day. And again, going back to, they kind of know that the value that they have, that your use, right? It's kind of a double-edged sword where they know people have to go out to the dentist, but to your future of your line of work, you can never go online. So I think it's still a balancing act. It's leveraging the fact that you're probably one of the best tenants to have during the pandemic by paying rent. I would caution some of you, and especially that's what I do the best, is tiptoeing around, any true hardships you're feeling, because you might have something in your lease that the landlord can request to see your financials. And once they play that card, well, if you told me everything was terrible and bad, but now you're back up to normal, we're in a little bit of the hot seat. So again, leveraging the fact that you're a really good tenant to playing with the pandemic and knowing that, there are probably some other tenants that are struggling, still helps today.
Yeah. Again, it's a good old reminder of that, if you have that Rockefeller glass half full, you might be surprised, especially as an Omicron or otherwise comes through, how much the landlord may be willing to allow you to expand into that adjacent suite. Maybe that dry cleaner is 3 months behind in rent, right? There's a whole lot more to the situation. And in my opinion, again, there's a lot more intent and interest, especially in a long-term tenancy from you as a dental tenant. And we've got some great examples of that here coming up in a second. Kelly, you know what? But what about if I hire you guys? And what happens if, Kelly, great, it. But Kelly, what happens if the landlord says no and says, go pound salt?
Yeah. So if I had a penny for a penny, $1 every time I, heard that, I would be rich because, they eventually come around. I think it's important to leave some of this, well, I do, obviously I'm a little biased, but to leave this to the expert, because what we have is time. So if the landlord says no, okay, well, I'll set my reminder. I'll call you in a week, and I will annoy you politely until you actually, throw up your hand and say, fine, I'll talk to you now. So that's sort of my bread and butter with when a landlord says no. I don't give up because I got the time.
It's true, right? It's far easier. If I'm a landlord, I'd love to deal directly with the dental tenant, right? Because they know you're the sole breadwinner, typically, of the practice, if not the primary, very close to it, right? And therefore, your time is far too valuable. So of course, drag, delay, right? Play the waiting game. You're just going to get frustrated and, oh, well, heck, I just got to sign it, right? So really, I can probably count on one hand over the past couple of years where the landlords come out and said, you know what? No. Right? When you actually dig into it, it's interesting. One, there was the doctor whose nephew was a dentist, and the vision was to have the family dentist in the family practice. So the landlord didn't want to keep the dentist there. Right. Number two that I can think of recently is when there's a demolition clause in there where the landlord wants the doctor out. So let's say 1 in 100, the landlord's going to come back and say, no, absolutely not. Right. Well, candidly, then don't you want to know that anyways? Wouldn't you want to know that now, especially if you don't have any options left? So quite frankly, just the knowing, and Kelly's incredible about calling the landlord, right, in very, right, velvet hammer sort of way, understanding where the landlord's head is, what are they thinking, what's the long-term plans? Hey, we're just trying to help the doctor out here. What's, what are we looking at for this building? Where does it fall in your redevelopment plans? Can we get a 10-year blackout period, right? So again, even when they say no to personal guarantee, the other piece is Kelly's got a dozen other ways of step downs that can get it dramatically better than what it is today, even though the landlord's technically saying, no, I'm not going to remove personal guarantee, but it's 98% better than what it is today.
Yeah, I think that's very true, Eric. It's really digging down to the landlord's sensitivity because, again, going back to who your landlord is, what are they scared about? And maybe it's just a blunt no because I'm scared from your landlord's perspective. But what I do is, okay, well, why? Walk me through it. What are you concerned about? Oh, the rent. Oh, it's a little bit too far out. Okay, well, let's talk about other things right now. We can maybe put a pause on that, and I'll as long as we keep that line of communication open, you're inching forward, and you're making progress. That's a win.
Absolutely.
So are we alerting the landlord of clauses that we shouldn't be? I mean, to Eric's point, don't you want to know, the landlord's intentions now? So for example, an example that I just ran into was adding that no sale proceed language that the lease didn't even have anything about consideration in it. But I love to add it just for clarity because you never know what the landlord's thinking in the future. And they actually came back and said, oh, well, no, if you assign the lease, we're going to retain the $25,000 security deposit. So it's really good that we know that now before entering into the lease, and through further negotiations, we actually got that removed and a line that said the landlord will not condition the lease, nor will they retain the security deposit.
So in short, no, right? We're not, even if you've got a very, I've got just a handshake kind of landlord and they're great and otherwise, what if they sell, right? Much better to negotiate with the devil you don't know than the devil you do know, and give yourself the protection. Again, if it's a 1 in 100, 1 in 1,000 chance that this could be an issue, why not get it fixed, right? Or at least to ensure that there's clarity so that, at least we can, or Kelly or otherwise, can help to frame it to say, come on, Mr. Landlord, are you really concerned about this particular thing? Here's why it's so important for the doctor to have this type of dental specific language.
So what if I jeopardize my relationship with my landlord? I can assure you that is my number one and all my colleagues' number one thing of the what not to do when entering into any negotiations. This is the partnership. We understand, this is your long-term home. This is the person that you still need to speak to once we are gone. And to Eric's point about maybe what if you get a new landlord? So sometimes when you do have that great relationship with Ted or whoever that is you talk to, I say, this is not about you, right? We know you're great, right? You're a great landlord, but Ted, what if you sell? We're talking 10, 20 years from now, and that person's not as nice as you. And then I bet, that landlord, Ted, he comes around and goes, oh, okay, I see what you're saying.
All your secrets are coming out here, Kelly.
Yeah, but that's the power of a third party, right? The power of the third party is that we have the language, and this is what we do day in and day out. So why not leave it to the experts? So this is testimony.
Kelly, I got to frame this here. I've never, in the 300 5-star Google reviews that Cirrus has, and the perfect 4.9, 5.0, Kelly, this is the first that came in from your client, not your client, but from the landlord. So how the heck did this? How did a landlord that you negotiated a great deal for the tenant, not the landlord, how the heck did you get a letter of thanks, a review from the landlord?
That's the thing. Landlords are people as well, right? You come in and you do your best that you can to you want to make their lives easier. What we do is we do all the heavy lifting, right? So as long as you can assure the landlord that you're here to make a fair deal, that's music to their ears, and they love that, right? And actually, in this deal, we got a lot of very, very, very tenant-friendly clauses that they were fine with.
Think about it as taking the emotion out of it, right? If you're thinking about your lease right now and you're reaching for a bottle of Tums, then right, having someone in between, the landlord has that same sort of feeling, right? It's their building, it's et cetera. So just try to separate yourself emotionally from it for a moment. And that's, whatever the third party is, but really having someone in between as that middle ground. I mean, we've done father to daughter, right? Mother to son, right? Types of tumultuous family relationships, and it works. So again, having someone in between to help hear, right? Frame it in a specific way and be able to keep plowing through is invaluable.
Mm-hmm. And if you're have a big institutional landlord, let's talk about the weather, right? Let's talk about, what you did last weekend. And again, it's going back to having time to kind of butter those people up to give you what you want.
Right. And Kelly's been on that side of the desk again. I mean, it has its good days and it has its bad days. You might think, well, hey, the landlord's got all the cards. Sure. But no, right? They've got objectives, they've got goals, they've got pressures all the same to get that space filled and to retain. And that could be their bonus. That could be a $10,000 difference that you make if you leave, right? Or don't renew or.
Mm-hmm. And then another client of mine said her communication with her landlord actually became better as a result. So.
Right. It's almost like a prenuptial or a wills and estate planning. What's the worst case scenario? And now let's build from there.
Mm-hmm.
So value. So Kelly, this is a key one. So guarantees. Let's just keep value out of it for a second. Let's say, how do you guarantee results? What's the guarantee? How do you guarantee? Kelly, I look forward to this question. How do you address a client's concerns or a question for, how do I, if I negotiate it myself or if you do it or otherwise, what's the guarantee?
Well, the guarantee I can guarantee to everybody today is that you will be making the most informed decision. You will know that somebody went to bat for you to try every which way to get you the best deal possible. And at the end of the day, you can take it or leave it. Just give us enough time to do that.
Yeah, it's a great way of doing it. It's, really the other way to look at it is, again, I can also probably guarantee that, it will be much better than if you were to do it on your own, which is a key component. And really it's the value of time is what it boils down to, which I can guarantee that if I was the landlord, I would take as much time as I could, knowing that you're $550 an hour chairside. So the more you look at it from that perspective, and really when you look at all the business clauses, let's just say hypothetically that they said yes to the 20 that Kelly went through, or the 25 that were on the list. What financial impact? What does that impact their year-end financial statements? right? Zero. Death and disability, restoration, assignment, right? Doesn't impact a penny, right? Yet for you, saves hundreds of thousands of dollars of potential risk. So even if you came back up, right, 5 cents per square foot, that's music to the landlord's ears. And well, hey, now I'm much more willing to make some of these changes. So after we've already done a great job on the financials, even if we came back up a little bit, wow, right? Suddenly now, hey, all these other sort of issues that don't cost me a penny, but if I could hit my year-end bonus, woof, I'm in, especially with the cost of used cars these days. Unbelievable. All right. Again, Q&A section for everyone else that it's open. This is fantastic. I see almost all are still on. We really appreciate that. Any additional questions for the landlord expert on the line here this evening? Dr. C, Dr. G, Dr. W, Dr. N. Any additional questions? So Kelly, what would you say is what are some of the top mistakes that a doctor that comes to you after they've taken a run at the landlord, let it be on a new deal, and then maybe part two of that is on a renewal? What are some of the top things to avoid that you get?
Honestly, it's just talking to them, because as soon as you talk to them and you get a conversation going, sometimes the landlord will say, oh, well, Dr. Bob didn't seem to have a problem with that. Why is it a problem now? So you kind of shoot yourself in the foot when you might think you're agreeing to something that's good, or, alleviating some concerns, but are actually making it much harder when there actually is a problem and somebody's trying to fix it.
Yeah, it's a great point, because again, don't forget, your landlord all day, every day is negotiating leases. So no different than with one of our phone calls. Very quickly, we can be able to get a full understanding of exactly where you're at, success, profitability, etc., just by a couple of open-ended questions. You may unwillingly or unknowingly share a little piece of information that can dramatically reduce the end results. Yeah, great question. Okay. So, and then on a new deal side, especially around things like a letter of intent. Oh, well, Kelly, I'll just engage you guys when I get to the lease.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it's the same thing. Coming back to lease. Well, you agreed to that. Way back when. Maybe you didn't know how much time you needed, and you agreed to something less. Maybe you didn't ask the right questions to your landlord, going back to how the base rent affects the free rent, affects the inducement. Are you truly getting the best deal in terms of rent and the maximum amount of that allowance, where it doesn't affect the rent skyrocketing $10? Do you have that knowledge and know how to talk to them? Right? Because the last thing that the landlord's going to want to do is backtrack on an already agreed to letter of intent.
Perfect. Excellent. On that note, we've taken lots of additional time. I think hopefully everyone's appreciated. Certainly I have, Kelly, of your time this evening. Just the tip of the iceberg, I think, of the landlord side, but incredibly invaluable information, guidance, etc. Again, how can we get a hold of you? info@cirrusconsultinggroup.com. There's the poll questions. We do appreciate all the feedback and filling out the survey afterwards on Kelly's content. And again, on that note, we truly appreciate all of your support. You can also go to henryschein.com/Cirrus, info@cirrusconsultinggroup.com. And again, for those of you that are also doubling up on the Tums, not a problem. I do keep the email. Few people get shocked, to the chagrin of the wife and the 1 and the 4-year-old. But if I can run away and answer some quick emails at night, I'm all yours. So feel free to reach out with any additional things. And if not, we will be in touch to schedule a call. As I know, the vast majority had already raised their hand for some sort of assistance, let it be with a lease review, rental rate analysis, and beyond. On that note, Kelly, thank you again. Greatly appreciate it. And thanks. Happy holidays, guys.
Thank you. Thank you, Eric. And thank you, Kelly. What a great presentation. And thank you to Cirrus for sponsoring this webinar. If anyone does have any outstanding questions, please email us at webinars@henryschein.com. And as a thank you for attending, everyone will receive the recording via email in the next week. So thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you on future webinars.
Perfect.
Thanks
Happy
again.
holidays. Merry Christmas, everybody. Thanks.